What do you know about Chinese emperors, power, prestige, and festivals? Well, that may not be the end. Chinese emperors were the most powerful people in ancient China. Their ascension is usually either hereditary, a coup, or the start of a new dynasty. And since their authority is dictatorial, they can't be questioned. Thus, some of them became power-drunk and did so many horrible things one could ever think of. Though it might have been centuries ago, they've not been erased from the sand of time. Curious to know all the diabolical things the Chinese emperors did during their reign? Join us on a roller coaster ride through China's history and the sinister acts of its past emperors. Revolution of Empress and Emperors. During the Western Zhou dynasty, local rulers had the autonomy to manage their own territories while serving a central king, who held significant power. However, following a brutal succession battle and the relocation of the royal capital, the Zhou kings began to lose their authority. This shift allowed regional lords to gain strength and eventually claim the title of king for themselves. In 221 BC, the king of Qin completed the unification of the states that had been warring for years. To signify his newfound dominance, he adopted the title Shi Huangdi, which translates to First Emperor. Prior to this, the term Huang was typically used as a respectful title for deceased ancestors, while Dai referred to the highest of ancestors historically linked to the venerated figures of the Shang dynasty. At that time, the two titles had never been used together in this way. Like the Zhou kings and their Shang predecessors, the ruler of China was traditionally known as Tianzi, a title meaning Son of Heaven, indicating a divine right to govern. The title Huangdi also carried similar connotations. In English, it can mean the august ancestor, the holy ruler, or the divine lord. Some modern scholars even refer to Huangdi as the Arch. Ever since then, when an emperor ascended to power while his father was still alive, he would be known as Taishang Huang. This practice began with Qin Shi Huang, who gave his father a posthumous title, a tradition that had already been established for monarchs. Liu Bang, who later founded the Han dynasty, was notable as the first emperor to take this title while his father was still living, primarily because his father could not show him the proper respect of bowing. Throughout history, especially during times of political fragmentation, there have often been multiple claimants to the title Son of Heaven. The political concept of the Mandate of Heaven supported those claimants who emerged victorious in their struggles for power. The officially recognized list of rightful rulers was determined by the dynastic histories documented over the centuries. Compiling the preceding dynasty's history was considered one of the hallmarks of legitimacy, along with symbols such as the Nine Ding or the heirloom seal of the realm. As with the first emperor, it remained very common to grant posthumous titles to the ancestors of the victors. While the emperor system continued, the imperial system was introduced. In 911, the title of Prime Minister of the Imperial Cabinet was created to rule alongside the emperor as part of an attempt to turn China into a constitutional monarchy. Puyi, who had reigned as the Xuantong Emperor, surrendered on 12th of February 1912, ending the Qing dynasty and the imperial tradition after more than 2,100 years. Yuan Shikai, former president of the Republic of China, attempted to restore dynastic rule as the Hongxian Emperor. However, his claim to the title of emperor ended on 22nd March 1916. Puyi was briefly restored for almost 2 weeks during a coup in 1917, but was overthrown again shortly after. He later became the Emperor of Manchukuo, a Japanese puppet state. He was captured by the Red Army as a prisoner of war after World War II and held in the Siberian city of Chita. He was returned to China by the Soviets and imprisoned in Fushun War Criminals Management Center. He lived until 1967 after he was released. Now, all these names and titles might not make sense to you, but it's worth mentioning that the emperors in ancient times ruled differently. No one could question them. They did what they like, anytime and any day. This gave them the unchecked power to perform acts that were termed abominable. But before we even dive into their acts, how powerful was an emperor in ancient China? The emperor's power. The emperor's words were considered sacred edicts, and his written proclamations were called directives from above. In simpler terms, the emperor's orders were to be obeyed immediately. He was elevated above all commoners, nobility, and members of the imperial family. Addresses to the emperor were always formal and self-deprecatory, even by the closest family members. The power of emperors in China differed greatly depending on the individual and the dynasty. For instance, those who founded a dynasty often tend to strengthen their rule through a form of autocracy. Notable examples include Qin Shi Huang, Gaozu, and Guangwu from the Han dynasty, Taizong from the Tang dynasty, Kublai Khan from the Yuan dynasty, and the Kangxi Emperor from the Qing dynasty. The common approach to gaining power over large areas often included the entire family of the emperor ruling. Over time, the connections among different branches of the family that ruled locally began to weaken. Eventually, their loyalty faded, plus the taxes they gathered locally began to impact the emperor's wealth. A notable example of this was during the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, who revoked and eliminated the nobility of almost all imperial relatives who had been favored by his ancestor Gaozu. Diabolical acts of Chinese emperors. Xiaji. Historians continue to debate whether Xia, the first dynasty in traditional Chinese history, truly existed. To date, there is no conclusive archaeological evidence confirming the existence of this mythical first dynasty. There were also no written records about Xia during the Shang dynasty, the latter supposedly the dynasty that replaced Xia. Despite this, many Chinese believe in the existence of Xia and that its final emperor was a tyrant. Purportedly, Xia Jie was an exceptionally cruel man, greatly intolerant of criticism and obsessed with intimate acts, luxury, and entertainment. His numerous crimes include a fondness for riding his advisors like horses and constructing a wine lake filled with naked men and women for his favorite consort. According to Zhou dynasty records dating several centuries later, Xia's horrific rule eventually saw many kingdoms he held running to the kingdom of Shang. After many battles, Tang, the king of Shang, defeated Xie and established the Shang dynasty. Xia Jie, after that, became a metaphor in Chinese literature for the inevitable change as a result of tyrannical rule. We also have Dixin. Immortalized in the literary epic The Investiture of the Gods, Dixin was described as a foul-natured tyrant hopelessly bewitched by Daji, the human form of a nine-tailed vixen. Under Daji's wicked influence, Dixin indulged in various immoral activities and sins, such as constructing the wine pool and meat forest, a large wine lake with an island on which meat skewers were suspended from trees. He also allegedly devised various brutal execution methods and was said to be sexually aroused by them. The most notorious of these methods was the cannon-burning punishment. A hollow bronze cylinder would be heated till red hot, while a victim is tied naked to it. It is known that Dixin's troops were soundly defeated in 1046 BC at Muye by the kingdom of Zhou, with the defeated emperor committing suicide. Based on this, one could conclude that Dixin was, at the very least, an inept ruler and military leader. For the Chinese, he goes down in history as one of the most terrible Chinese emperors ever. His outrageous crimes continue to be regularly condemned on television and in movie adaptations of The Investiture of the Gods. But he wasn't the only one. There were still many more after him. Zhou Yuwang. Zhou Yuwang was the 12th ruler of the Western Zhou dynasty, and apart from his notorious love story, little is known about him. In 779 BC, a consort named Bao Si entered the palace, and before long, Zhou Yuwang was completely obsessed with the beauty. He even replaced his original queen with her. Unfortunately for the besotted emperor, though, Bao Si was melancholic and uninclined to smile no matter what the emperor did. Eventually, Zhou Yuwang experimented with the prank of lighting wartime warning beacons and fooling his nobles into thinking barbarians were invading the capital. At the sight of armies frantically rushing to the aid of the capital, the moody Bao Si finally broke into a hint of a smile. Indignant as they were, the nobles would have forgiven Zhou Yuwang had he not repeatedly pulled the same prank. Ultimately, in an oriental staging of the boy who cried wolf story, no one came to the capital's aid when barbarians genuinely attacked the capital. Zhu Yu Wang was slaughtered during the invasion. Wile Bao Si was captured. After the Zhou dynasty regained control, the capital was also permanently shifted eastward to Luoyang, thus ending the Western Zhou dynastic era. The story of the foolish emperor who toyed with military matters for the sake of a smile then became an enduring Chinese allegory on responsibility and sensibility. Han ID. During the Western Han dynasty, male consorts openly existed within the imperial palace, usually handsome and artistic young men or palace eunuchs. Their formal duties ranged from mere attendants to important court officials. Some historical accounts even state that practically every Han emperor had a favorite guy in his entourage. This includes greatly respected Han emperors, such as Han Gaozu and Han Wudi. In the case of Han ID, the young emperor became infatuated at first sight with the handsome Dong Xian. He was so infatuated that he immediately bestowed an emissary position on the young lad. He even allowed the younger man to sit on his lap. In the years to follow, Dong Xian was showered with even more riches and promotions, becoming China's most powerful official at 22. So love-struck was ID. He once even joked about abdicating in favor of Dong Xian, gross misconduct considered unimaginable. By all counts, Dong Xian would have ultimately monopolized power in the palace, maybe even disposed of the emperor, had Han ID not mysteriously died in 1 BC. In the political coup that followed, Dong Xian was forced by his rivals to commit suicide. 10 years later, the treacherous Wang Mong also seized power, thus ending the Western Han dynasty. Modern historians agree that Han ID and Dong Xian likely had an active homosexual relationship, despite both being married and Dong Xian having children. The famous story goes that the emperor woke up one afternoon to find Dong Xian asleep on his sleeve. So as not to wake his lover, the emperor cut off his sleeve before leaving the bed. Han Lingdi. Han Lingdi was the 12th emperor of the Eastern Han dynasty and the last to rule. Dissolute by nature, he neglected state affairs and overindulged in women. Worse, the court came to be dominated by eunuchs during his reign, the worst being the hated Zhang Rang. These corrupted court officers levied increasingly unbearable taxes on peasants to fund the emperor's lavish lifestyle and line their pockets. Han Lingdi himself also approved the practice of selling political offices for money. This irredeemably damaged the integrity of the already teetering Eastern Han dynasty. Without surprise, Han Lingdi's actions became major catalysts for the demise of the Eastern Han dynasty. His appalling policies infuriated and empowered various warlords and politician factions, with open conflict breaking out between these factions shortly after Han Lingdi's death. Jin Huidi. In AD 280, after 60 years of civil war between Chao Wei, Shu Han, and Sun Wu, China was reunited again under the Jin dynasty. Peace was short-lived. However, after barely 10 years, the devastating War of the Eight Princes broke out in AD 291. The intermittent conflict continued till AD 306, weakening the fragile new empire. The War of the Eight Princes, in turn, laid the groundwork for invasion by the 5 barbarian tribes of northern China. This invasion ended with Jin losing its northern and western territories. Till its demise, the Jin dynasty never regained these lands. On the surface, this swift disintegration of Jin could be blamed on Jin Huidi, the dynasty's second emperor. Hopelessly aloof and unintelligent, he spent his reign manipulated by his empress, regents, and royal relatives before mysteriously dying in early AD 307. Bei Qi Wen Xuandi. Many Chinese emperors achieve greatness early in their reigns, only to slip into debauchery and disregard in later years. One Xuandi of northern Qi during the northern and southern dynasties period is the most appalling among the many examples. Respected in his youth for his military prowess, as well as efforts to reduce corruption, Wen Xuandi eventually succumbed to alcoholism, and by all accounts was very possibly psychotic during his later reign. He once beheaded a consort he suspected of infidelity. He also tossed her head onto a banquet platter while fondling the corpse's leg. During Wen Xuandi's final years, the entire court, including his son, lived in constant fear of him. Not only was the emperor homicidal when drunk, but he was also an insatiable womanizer. Few females in the palace were spared. Ironically, despite Wen Xuandi's savagery at home, northern Qi was at its strongest under him. His brutality during wars saw the conquest or repulsion of many barbarian tribes. Law and order within the imperial court were also strengthened through fear of him. It thus remains anyone's guess as to what northern Qi would have become had Wen Xuandi not abruptly died at age 33, likely from alcoholism-related reasons. Keep watching as the next emperor's acts will leave you spellbound. Sui Yangdi. The second emperor of the short-lived Sui dynasty appears in any literature featuring terrible Chinese emperors. Indeed, his crimes are many. Fond of grandiose projects, hungry to invade neighboring kingdoms, and decadent by nature, his decisions directly caused the death of millions of Chinese commoners, on top of bankrupting the Sui treasury. Historians consider Sui Yangdi one of China's worst tyrants, if not China's worst emperor ever. To give some numerical indications of his horrific rule, his reconstruction of the Great Wall resulted in 6 million workers losing their lives. While his troops succeeded in conquering Champa, in what is now southern Vietnam, thousands of Sui soldiers died from malaria. Most notorious, Sui Yangdi ordered an invasion of the Korean kingdom of Goguryeo over a mere slight but utterly mismanaged war when personally overseeing it. This resulted in several 100,000 Sui soldiers dying from famine or ambushes. These repeated damages to the Sui dynasty ultimately saw revolts erupting throughout China. In AD 618, this despised emperor was finally strangled to death during a coup led by a top Sui general. The famous Tang dynasty then permanently replaced Sui. Song Huizong. Other than recognition for his artistic talents, Chinese history has no kind words for Song Huizong, the second-last emperor of the Northern Song dynasty. Inheriting his empire at a time when Northern Song was at its weakest, Song Huizong's ineffectual rule concluded with a full-scale Jurchen invasion. In AD 1127, his capital was overrun, and Song Huizong and his son were captured. The enslaved emperor then spent the next 7 years in humiliating captivity under his invaders. He died in AD 1135, thousands of miles from remnant Song territory. Today, the harshest critics condemn Song Huizong as an indulgent and decadent ruler. He was a good-for-nothing emperor who spent his days surrounded by music and the arts instead of attending to the crisis brewing on his borders. Legend also goes that Song Huizong was lascivious, frequently leaving his palace incognito to visit courtesans, the most famous being the beauty Li Shishi. But then, we can conclude that Song paid in full for his crimes, having spent 7 years in a strange land. Ming Shenzong. In the case of Ming Shenzong, more commonly remembered as the Wanli Emperor, his astonishing disinterest in governing China earned him permanent placement on any list of terrible Chinese emperors. The 14th ruler of the Ming dynasty, he spent 20 of his 48 years of rule away from court. In other words, this sovereign was on strike for nearly half his reign. Due to this absence, the already brittle Ming dynasty further declined, with power ensconced by corrupted officers and eunuchs. While his empire disintegrated, Ming Shenzong devoted his days to supervising the construction of his underground mausoleum. So it was said he also held lavish nightly parties and orgies within the unfinished structure. It should be noted that Ming Shenzong was regarded as a diligent and capable ruler during his younger days. Between AD 1582 and AD 1600, he repelled various foreign invasions and suppressed an uprising. Some historians thus opined that the man's industrial action was due to his disenchantment with court politics, particularly how he was denied his choice of successor. Regardless, Ming Shenzong's blatant abandonment of his duties laid the groundwork for China's occupation by the Manchus in AD 1644. Some historians go as far as to state that it was not the final two Ming emperors, but Ming Shenzong who should be responsible for the stunning defeat. Well, all these now lie in the past. China has become one of the most developed nations in the world. Under the Communist Party, the country now boasts of incredible technologies. So, what are some of the interesting facts about China? Keep watching to find out. Interesting facts about China. As of July 2023, China is the second most populous country in the world, with over 1.4 billion people. This is based on Worldometer's elaboration on the latest United Nations data. Mandarin is not the only language in China. Others include Yue, Wu, Minbei, Minnan, Shang, Gan, and Hakka. China is considered a coconut culture. Chinese people present a stony, formal exterior, but are as warm and welcoming as other cultures. Compared to Western countries, close friendships and relationships in China are earned over time. Family members living in one home is a reflection of Chinese success. Elders are highly revered in China. Younger generations are also expected to take care of their aging family members. They even have an elderly rights law. Have you ever heard of that? The majority of Chinese people remember wars fought at home. Also, history is deeply embedded in their educational system. Even their younger population knows Chinese history very well. Then, which country has the longest railway line in the world? That must be China. Why? Put all of China's railway lines. It can loop around the Earth 2 times. Also, the New Year celebration worldwide is just a day or two in almost all countries. However, the celebration of Chinese New Year lasts for 15 days. It's the biggest holiday in China, usually celebrated in January or February. New Year in China is even more popular than Christmas. But here's an even more interesting fact. Many countries also celebrate Chinese New Year. Every year, China is named after one of the 12 Chinese zodiac animals: rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, and pig. Also, the Beilong elevator in the Wulingyuan area of Zhangjiajie, China, can carry visitors up to 300 meters high on a cliff's edge. This elevator is the world's heaviest and highest outdoor elevator. China is a multi-religious country. Because of its large population, many world religions have adhered there. However, most Chinese usually practice Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. China, along with Italy, has the highest number of UNESCO sites in the world. Some of China's most visited UNESCO sites include the Forbidden City in Beijing, the Great Wall of China, the Summer Palace in Beijing, the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, and the world-famous Terracotta Army. Regarding UNESCO sites in China, the Forbidden City in Beijing has 9,000 rooms. Have you ever imagined such a structure? It is one of the largest and oldest imperial palaces in the world. Despite its huge size, China surprisingly only has one time zone. Everybody is using the official Beijing time. Every single panda living in the whole world belongs to China, except for 2. The only 2 pandas in the world that don't belong to China live in the Chapultepec Zoo in Mexico City, Mexico. The Mexican pandas are named Xin Xin and Xuan Xuan. In every other country, all pandas are on loan from China. In China, all pandas can be found in Chengdu, Sichuan's capital city. Pandas eat all day long. They take about 10 to 16 hours a day to eat. Despite belonging to the bear family, they do not hibernate. Chinese people are the biggest travel spenders in the world. They spend $260 billion annually, twice that of American travelers. Ancient Chinese medicine discovered blood 2,000 years before European scientist William Harvey announced it in 1628. What do you know about ice cream? It was discovered in China some 4,000 years ago. The Chinese combined milk, rice mixture, and snow to create the yummy dessert. This might shock you. Football was not invented in Europe. The first recorded information about the sport was 2,200 years ago in China. Ancient Chinese people created the world's first soccer ball made of leather. The ball was filled with feathers and hair, and the sport was originally called Tsu Chu, which means kicking a ball. China builds a new skyscraper every 5 days. No country in the world is growing as fast as China. In a year, China will build at least 73 new skyscrapers. You will never eat the same food twice in China. Every region in the country has its dishes, distinct flavors, and cuisine. In addition, Chinese food is served almost always fresh. What else do you know about China and its emperors? Feel free to share your mind in the comment section below.